International trade, it's that magical process where one country sends another country a boatload of, say, rubber chickens and gets back a boatload of perhaps artisanal light bulbs. But sometimes someone decides the music is wrong, or their dance partner is stepping on their toes. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is when things get spicy. This brings us to a fascinating kerfuffle between the United States and India. These two giant democracies have been locked in a bit of a trade tussle. It's a dispute that involves shiny metals, delicious nuts, and a whole lot of pointing fingers. Think of it as a very high-stakes food fight, but instead of mashed potatoes, they're flinging tariffs. The whole saga revolves around something called retaliatory tariffs. Now, tariff is just a fancy word for a tax on imported goods, designed to make them more expensive and protect local industries. Retaliatory means one country slaps on these taxes because another country did it to them first. Fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be an economically bumpy ride. Our story begins with a decision from Washington. Back in March 2018, the United States decided that foreign steel and aluminum were a national security threat. Invoking Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, the U.S. imposed hefty tariffs. We're talking a 25% tariff on certain steel imports and a 10% tariff on certain aluminum imports. The goal was to protect American steel and aluminum producers. Many countries on the receiving end of these tariffs weren't thrilled. They argued that using national security as a justification was a bit of a stretch. Several key allies like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union were initially hit, though some later negotiated exemptions. India, however, was not one of the lucky ones to get a pass. As a significant exporter of steel and aluminum to the U.S., these new American tariffs stung. The stage was set for a response. Faced with these American tariffs, India decided to retaliate. In June 2018, India announced its own set of tariffs on a list of 28 American products. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. These were carefully chosen items designed to make American exporters feel a similar pinch. The list included agricultural products like almonds, apples, walnuts, chickpeas, and lentils. Beyond the farm, certain chemical products and specific types of iron and steel goods also faced higher import duties. The message was clear. If you're going to make it harder for us to sell our metals, we're going to make it harder for you to sell us your nuts and fruits. The value of U.S. exports affected by these Indian tariffs was estimated to be around $1.2 billion. India wasn't trying to start an all-out trade war, but it was signaling that it wouldn't be a passive recipient of what it viewed as unfair trade practices. These weren't just random products, they were chosen because the U.S. had a significant export interest in them. This move added another layer of complexity to the already strained trade relationship. American agricultural exporters were particularly concerned, frustrating to say the least for everyone involved in the actual trade. So what was India's official line? Why did they feel the need to hit back with tariffs on American almonds and apples? India's argument was straightforward. The U.S. tariffs were unfair, and India had the right to respond. They argued that the American duties on steel and aluminum were safeguard measures disguised under the cloak of national security. Under World Trade Organization rules, if a country imposes safeguard measures, other affected countries are entitled to retaliate or seek compensation. India maintained that the U.S. hadn't followed proper WTO procedures. They contended that the Section 232 tariffs were inconsistent with several articles of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. Specifically, they pointed out that the U.S. didn't offer any trade compensation for the new tariffs. Furthermore, India emphasized that its retaliatory tariffs were proportionate to the damage caused by the U.S. measures. They weren't trying to escalate things wildly, they were trying to rebalance the scales. The value of U.S. goods targeted by India was carefully calibrated to match the estimated impact of the U.S. tariffs on Indian exports. Essentially, India's position was that it was acting defensively. They saw the U.S. tariffs as a unilateral move that disrupted the established trade balance and violated international commitments. Therefore, their counter tariffs were a legitimate response aimed at protecting their own economic interests. Now let's flip the script and look at why Uncle Sam was less than pleased with India's retaliation. The United States had a very different interpretation of events. Their core argument was that India's retaliatory tariffs were illegal under WTO rules. The US maintained that its own Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum were justified on national security grounds. The WTO rules allow countries to take any action they consider necessary for the protection of their essential security interests. In their view, national security is a sovereign right, and other countries, or even the WTO itself, don't get to second-guess a nation's judgment on what constitutes a threat to its security. So, from Washington's perspective, India had no right to retaliate. Furthermore, the US contended that India should have waited for the WTO to rule on the legality of the American Section 232 tariffs before imposing any countermeasures. By retaliating preemptively, the US argued, India was undermining the WTO's dispute settlement system. In 2019, the US took India to the WTO over these retaliatory tariffs, initiating a formal dispute. The American complaint claimed that India's tariffs violated key WTO agreements because they were discriminatory and applied above India's bound rates. It's a classic, she said, but with economists and lawyers. So, with both the United States and India pointing fingers, who steps in to mediate? Enter the World Trade Organization, or WTO. Think of the WTO as a combination of a rulebook for international commerce, a forum for negotiating trade deals, and a court for settling trade disputes. The WTO's dispute settlement system is one of its most important functions. When one member country believes another member country is violating a trade agreement, it can bring a case to the WTO. This process is designed to be impartial and rules-based, providing a more predictable and stable way to resolve conflicts. The goal is to ensure that trade flows as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. This entire system, while not perfect, is what stands between orderly trade and a global free-for-all. So, what happened when the WTO's dispute settlement machinery ground its gears over this United States-India spat? In a related but separate case concerning the United States Section 232 tariffs, a WTO panel ruled in late 2022 that the United States' national security justification for its steel and aluminum tariffs was inconsistent with WTO rules. The panel basically said, nice try with the national security thing, America, but that doesn't quite fly under our interpretation of the agreement. This ruling provided some vindication for countries like India. The United States predictably rejected the panel's findings, appealing them into a sort of legal limbo. Regarding the specific case the United States brought against India's retaliatory tariffs, things also moved forward, albeit slowly. In mid-2023, reports emerged that the United States and India had reached a mutual agreement to resolve 6 outstanding trade disputes at the WTO. This agreement was announced during Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's state visit to the United States. As part of this deal, India agreed to remove its retaliatory tariffs on certain United States products. This resolution was a negotiated settlement, a diplomatic solution. This whole tariff tango between the United States and India wasn't just about dollars and cents. When two major global players get into a public disagreement over trade, it sends signals across the world. For United States-India relations, this dispute added a layer of friction to what is otherwise often described as a growing strategic partnership. Both countries share concerns about regional security, the rise of China, and democratic values. Yet, trade has consistently been a somewhat thorny issue. Globally, such disputes also test the strength and relevance of institutions like the WTO. When major economies appear to sidestep or selectively interpret WTO rules, it can undermine the multilateral trading system. Moreover, these disputes can have real-world consequences for businesses and consumers. So, where does this leave our two tariff-wielding titans, the United States and India, as of today? A significant development occurred in mid-2023 when both nations agreed to terminate 6 outstanding WTO disputes. India agreed to remove the additional duties it had imposed in 2018. This was a big step towards de-escalation. This agreement was part of a broader effort to strengthen bilateral ties. The United States also agreed to grant improved market access for certain Indian steel and aluminum products. However, the underlying issues that led to the original United States Section 232 tariffs haven't entirely vanished. The debate over the use of national security exceptions in trade and the concerns about global overcapacity in steel and aluminum are still very much alive. Future administrations in either country could always revisit these issues. Let's hope for more beautiful bargains than bickering.